Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something you specifically requested, greenhouse gases.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah, you sent over this Wikipedia article hoping to really understand the key takeaways, and honestly, I can't wait to dig in.
Yeah.
It feels like they're constantly in the headlines, especially with all the climate change discussions.
It's true. They're absolutely crucial to understanding the changes happening on our planet.
Yeah.
So where should we begin?
Well, your Wikipedia article starts with the basics.
Okay.
So let's follow suit.
Sounds good.
What exactly are greenhouse gases?
Right.
I get that they impact our climate, but
Yeah.
what makes them different from other gases in the atmosphere?
You can think of them like Earth's personal heat trappers.
Okay.
They absorb and emit infrared radiation,
Mm-hmm.
which is the type of energy our planet radiates as heat.
Right.
So they act like a giant invisible blanket, keeping Earth warm enough for life to thrive.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
The article mentioned that without them. Earth would be a giant ice cube, right?
exactly. The article highlights that the average surface temperature would be a bone-chilling -18 degrees Celsius
Wow.
without greenhouse gases.
Okay.
Instead, thanks to them,
Yeah.
we enjoy a much more comfortable average of 15 degrees Celsius.
That's a huge difference. Thinking about those temperatures really highlights how essential this balance is.
Right.
But like you said earlier, it's
Yeah.
all about balance, right? Too much of a good thing can be a problem.
Precisely.
Okay.
The greenhouse effect itself is essential for life,
Right.
as we know it.
Yeah.
But when the concentration of these heat-trapping gases increases too much,
Yeah.
the planet warms more intensely than it should.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we call global warming, and it's a key driver of climate change.
Okay, so too much of a good thing can throw the whole system out of whack.
Yeah.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
So which of these gases are the major players in this whole atmospheric balancing act?
Well, the article lists 5 as the most abundant. Water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and ozone.
Okay, 5 major players.
Yeah.
But if we had to pick an MVP,
Right.
who has the biggest impact?
Believe it or not, the MVP title goes to water vapor.
Really?
It contributes a whopping 41 to 67% of
Oh,
the greenhouse effect.
really? Water vapor. I always thought carbon dioxide was the biggest culprit.
While carbon dioxide is definitely significant,
Yeah.
water vapor actually has a much greater influence of the greenhouse effect.
Okay.
What's fascinating is that human activities don't directly increase global water vapor levels in the same way that we release carbon dioxide by burning fossil fuels.
So if we're not directly pumping water vapor into the atmosphere, how are W influencing it?
Right.
It feels like something that massive would be beyond our control.
You're right. It is a massive system, but it's still connected to our actions.
Okay.
The link is temperature.
Okay.
As other greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide, warm the planet,
Mm-hmm.
the atmosphere's capacity to hold water vapor increases. This leads to even more warming, creating what we call a positive feedback loop.
So it's like a chain reaction where
Yeah.
our actions trigger a cascade of effects.
Exactly. And the article you submitted goes on to highlight
Right.
how human activities have dramatically increased
Yeah.
the concentration of other greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane.
Right. It mentions some pretty stark statistics
Yeah.
about how much these levels have risen since the Industrial Revolution.
Since around 1750,
Okay.
human activities have caused carbon dioxide levels to surge by over 50%,
Wow.
and methane levels have increased by a staggering 150%.
Okay, those numbers are definitely alarming.
Yeah.
But to back up a bit,
Okay.
what exactly are the main sources of these increases? Is it just all about fossil fuels?
For carbon dioxide,
Yeah.
the primary source is indeed burning fossil fuels.
Okay.
Coal, oil, and natural gas for energy.
Right.
But methane comes from a more diverse mix of sources.
So it's not just our cars and power plants, but other activities too.
Exactly.
Okay.
Think about agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
especially livestock farming.
Right.
Cows, for example, release significant amounts of methane during digestion.
Oh, wow.
Then there's fossil fuel production, and even landfills and waste management, all contributing to methane emissions.
So it's a lot more complicated than just pointing the finger at one industry or activity.
Right.
It's a complex web of interconnected systems.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about what happens to these greenhouse gases once they're released.
Okay.
Do they just vanish after a while, or do they linger?
That's a crucial question
Yeah,
because it brings up the idea of their lifespans in the atmosphere.
right.
Some, like carbon dioxide,
Yeah.
are incredibly stubborn, hanging around for thousands of years.
Wow.
Methane, on the other hand, is
Yeah.
relatively short-lived, with an average lifespan of about 12 years.
So carbon dioxide is like that house gas who never leaves.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And methane is more like a quick visit,
Right.
maybe a little more intense.
And while methane has a shorter lifespan, don't underestimate its impact,
Okay.
pound for pound.
Uh-huh.
It actually has a much stronger warming potential
Wow.
than carbon dioxide over that shorter time frame.
Okay, so it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
One hangs around longer, the
Right.
other packs a bigger punch while it's there.
Exactly.
It really highlights the different ways these gases can influence the climate. As I was reading through this Wikipedia article,
Okay.
something that really caught my eye was the section on greenhouse gases over geological timescales.
Right.
Like millions of years.
Yeah.
It's almost hard to wrap my head around such vast stretches of time.
You're talking about the deep time perspective.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here
Mm-hmm.
is that scientists estimate current CO2 concentrations might be the highest they've been in 14 million years.
Wow, 14 million years.
Yeah,
That's mind-boggling.
it is.
Does that mean we can learn something by looking back that far?
It offers a unique perspective.
Okay.
The last time Earth experienced similar CO2 levels was during the mid-Pliocene warm period,
Right.
roughly 3 to 3.3 million years ago.
Wow.
Studying this period
Right.
can give us insights into the potential climate changes
Yeah.
we might face in the future if we don't address our current emissions trajectory.
So it's like we're hitting rewind on Earth's climate.
In a sense, yes.
Fast forwarding to a time long before humans were around.
And during that time,
Yeah.
sea levels were significantly higher and temperatures were warmer.
Wow.
It paints a picture of a very different world than the one we know today.
It's definitely a sobering thought to consider.
Yeah.
But all of this begs the question,
Okay.
if these gases are invisible,
Right.
how do scientists even know how much of them is in the atmosphere?
Yeah.
It's not like we can just look up and see them, right?
That's a great question, and it's where scientific ingenuity comes in.
Okay.
Scientists have developed incredibly precise ways to track and measure the concentrations of these gases.
So we're not just blindly pumping these gases into the air, we're actually keeping tabs on them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The article describes a range of techniques
Mm-hmm.
from ground-based stations
Yeah.
that continuously monitor the air
Right?
to sophisticated satellites like the Orbiting Carbon Observatory.
Oh, wow.
This satellite actually measures CO2 levels from space.
Space-age monitoring for an invisible threat, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But why go to all that trouble? What's the point of collecting all this data?
These measurements are crucial for several reasons.
Okay.
First,
Yeah.
they allow us to track the changes in greenhouse gas concentrations over time,
Right.
giving us a clear picture of how our actions are impacting the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
This data is then used
Mhm.
to develop climate models and make projections about future climate scenarios.
So it's not just about knowing what these gases are,
Right.
but also understanding how much is out there and how those levels are changing over time. It makes you realize how much effort goes into understanding this invisible world of greenhouse gases.
Exactly.
And the data collected from these monitoring efforts
Right.
helps to inform climate policies and international agreements aimed at mitigating climate change.
Because.
It's a reminder that science plays a vital role in addressing these global challenges.
Precisely.
And remember that index we talked about earlier,
Right.
the Annual Greenhouse Gas Index,
Right.
or AGGI, that uses this data to track the total radiative forcing of these long-lived greenhouse gases, giving us a clear picture of how much we're contributing to the warming of the planet.
It does.
So it really brings it all together.
That's the-
Science, the data,
Yeah.
and ultimately the impact on our planet.
And now that we've established a good understanding of the basics
Okay.
of greenhouse gases
Yeah.
and how they're measured, let's shift gears and talk about what we can do about them.
Yeah, let's move from understanding the problem to exploring potential solutions.
Exactly.
Because what's the point of all this knowledge if we don't use it to create a better future?
Exactly. And there's a lot we can do.
Okay.
So stay tuned, because in part 2 of this deep dive,
All right.
we'll explore the fascinating world of climate solutions.
Sounds good. I can't wait.
Yeah, it should be good.
Okay, so we spent the first part of this deep dive really unpacking the science behind greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
We've covered their sources, their lifespans, how we track them. It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot.
But I'm ready to shift gears and get into the solutions. What can we actually do about this?
Yeah.
It all feels so big.
It is big, no doubt. But the good news is there isn't just one solution.
Right.
There's a whole toolbox of strategies we can use to address climate change. And you actually mentioned in your notes that you were particularly curious about the future of shipping, right?
Yes. It seems like such a massive industry with those giant container ships crisscrossing the oceans. Can something like that ever be truly green?
It's a huge challenge, for sure. But there are a lot of people working on innovative solutions.
Okay.
One of the most fundamental approaches, and this applies to more than just shipping, is transitioning away from fossil fuels and embracing renewable energy sources.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If burning fossil fuels is the main driver of those CO2 emissions, finding cleaner alternatives seems like a logical first step.
Exactly. Your source material doesn't get into the specifics of every renewable technology out there.
Sure.
But I think we can connect some dots based on what we know.
Okay.
Solar, wind, hydro, geothermal.
Right.
These are all ways to generate energy without releasing those harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And some of them could even be adapted for large ships.
So instead of those massive diesel engines, we could have ships powered by the sun or wind?
It's not that simple, of course. There are technical challenges to overcome, especially for long-haul voyages.
Yeah.
But there are companies experimenting with things like wind-assisted propulsion.
Okay.
Using large sails or kites to harness wind power.
Interesting.
And solar panels can be integrated into the ship's design to provide auxiliary power.
That's fascinating. It feels very futuristic to imagine these giant ships sailing across the ocean, powered by the wind and sun.
Yeah.
But even with renewables, are there some industries where it's just impossible to eliminate fossil fuels completely?
Right.
Like, I imagine it's hard to run a steel mill on solar power alone.
You're hitting on a really important point.
Okay.
There are some sectors, like heavy industry, where completely eliminating fossil fuels is a huge challenge with current technology.
Yeah.
That's where another tool comes in.
Okay.
Carbon capture and storage.
Wait.
Or CCS.
CCS.
Yeah.
That sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. How does that work?
It's actually a pretty clever idea.
Yeah.
CCS technologies capture carbon dioxide emissions directly from industrial sources or even from the air itself before they can reach the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Then the captured CO2 is transported and stored underground, usually in deep geological formations.
So it's like we're cleaning up after ourselves,
Right.
preventing that CO2 from causing further warming. But are there any risks involved with storing all that CO2 underground?
Yeah.
Could it leak out?
That's one of the concerns that scientists and engineers are working to address. They're carefully selecting storage sites and developing monitoring systems to ensure that the CO2 stays put. And the storage potential is vast.
Wow.
There are geological formations that can hold centuries worth of emissions.
That's good to know. It sounds promising.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what about those methane emissions from agriculture?
Right.
Do we all need to become vegetarians to save the planet?
Dietary choices can definitely play a role.
Right.
But there are other innovative solutions being explored within the agricultural sector as well.
Oh, like what? Besides seaweed-eating cows, which I still can't get over.
Well, for starters, researchers are looking at ways to modify livestock feed to reduce the amount of methane produced during digestion.
Interesting.
Adding things like certain types of seaweed to their diet has shown some promising results.
So we might actually have seaweed farmers helping to fight climate change.
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
And beyond feed, there are also efforts to improve manure management practices.
Okay.
Capturing methane from manure and using it as a source of biogas is a way to turn waste into a valuable resource.
It's amazing how creativity and innovation can lead to these kinds of solutions. But it sounds like technology is only part of the answer here.
Right.
It feels like there's a much bigger picture we need to consider.
You're absolutely right. Addressing climate change requires a multifaceted approach.
Okay.
It's not just about inventing new gadgets.
Right.
It's about transforming behaviors and systems.
Yeah.
We need individual actions, collective efforts, policy changes.
Right.
It all works together.
So it's about the choices we make as individuals, but also about the systems and structures that shape our world.
Precisely. Something as simple as reducing food waste can have a significant impact. When food goes to waste, we're not just throwing away the food itself.
Right.
We're wasting all the resources that went into producing it.
Yeah.
The land, water, energy, and yes, the greenhouse gas emissions.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that even small actions can contribute to a larger solution.
They absolutely do. And on a larger scale, there's growing interest in regenerative agriculture.
Okay.
which focuses on practices that improve soil health, increase biodiversity, and enhance carbon sequestration.
So we're talking renewables, carbon capture, sustainable agriculture.
Yeah.
This toolbox is getting pretty full. What other tools should we be aware of?
Well, you mentioned reforestation in your notes.
Yeah.
And that's a big one. Trees are incredible carbon sinks,
Right.
absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it in their wood, roots, and the surrounding soil.
Right. Planting more trees seems like a pretty straightforward solution.
It is, and it has multiple benefits. Reforestation. Planting trees where forests have been cut down helps to restore ecosystems and biodiversity.
Right.
And afforestation,
Yeah.
which is planting trees in areas where there haven't been forests before, can create new carbon sinks.
So it's a win-win, good for the planet, A&D, good for the ecosystems. But with so many different approaches,
Right.
how do we decide which solutions are the most effective? It feels overwhelming to even know where to start.
That's a key question.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. The best approach will vary depending on the context.
Okay.
What works in one region might not be feasible in another.
Yeah, right.
We need to consider factors like available resources, existing infrastructure, and even political will.
So it's about finding the right combination of tools for each situation.
Exactly. But there are some guiding principles that can help us navigate these complex decisions.
Okay, I'm all ears. What should we be thinking about when we evaluate different climate solutions?
One important factor is scalability. Can a solution be implemented on a large enough scale to make a meaningful difference? We need solutions that can be replicated and expanded to have a global impact.
So it's not just about finding a cool, innovative idea.
Right.
It's about whether that idea can actually be put into practice on a large scale.
Precisely. And then there's cost effectiveness.
Okay.
Some solutions might be technically feasible, but prohibitively expensive.
Right.
Especially for developing countries that are often hit hardest by climate change, but have fewer resources to invest in solutions.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Climate justice is a huge part of this conversation.
Absolutely.
We need to make sure that solutions are equitable and benefit everyone, not just those who can afford them.
You're raising a really important point.
Yeah.
Climate solutions should be implemented in a way that's fair and just taking into account the needs and perspectives of different communities and nations.
It feels like we're talking about a massive shift, not just in technology, but also in our values and priorities.
You're absolutely right. Addressing climate change requires a fundamental shift in how we think about our relationship with the planet. But I'm sensing another question bubbling up.
Yeah.
Are you wondering who's going to pay for all of this?
To be honest, yes. All of these solutions sound expensive. Who's footing the bill?
That's where things get a little tricky. Financing climate action is complex and often politically charged. But one thing's clear.
Okay.
We need significant investments from both the public and private sectors to develop, deploy, and scale up these solutions.
So it's a shared responsibility.
Absolutely.
Governments, businesses, investors all need to step up.
Absolutely. And it's not just about throwing money at the problem.
Right.
It's about smart strategic investments. It's about redirecting existing funds away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy alternatives.
Okay.
It's about creating policies and regulations that incentivize sustainable practices and hold polluters accountable.
It feels like we're talking about a complete economic and systemic overhaul.
In a way, yes. But it's an overhaul that's necessary for a sustainable future.
Yeah.
We need to shift our thinking from short-term profits to long-term well-being for ourselves and for the planet.
Wow, this conversation has really expanded my perspective.
Yeah.
We've gone from the nitty-gritty of greenhouse gases to this much broader discussion about economics, policy, and even our values as a society.
It's all interconnected.
Yeah.
And speaking of connections, let's wrap up this part of our deep dive by acknowledging that while the challenge is immense, we are seeing real progress in many areas.
Okay, let's talk about that progress. In part 3, let's dive into the data and see if all these efforts are actually making a dent in those rising greenhouse gas levels.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We started by breaking down the science behind greenhouse gases. And then we explored this incredible toolbox of solutions.
Yeah, there are a lot.
From renewable energy and carbon capture to sustainable agriculture and reforestation.
It's pretty amazing.
It feels like there's a lot of hope and innovation out there.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I'm still a little uneasy.
I understand.
Are we actually making any progress in reducing these emissions? I mean, the news can be pretty doom and gloom sometimes.
It's true. The headlines can be daunting.
Yeah.
And it's important to acknowledge that the global picture is still complex.
Yeah.
But I think it's also essential to avoid getting caught in a spiral of despair.
Right.
Because that can lead to inaction.
Right. It's like that saying, it's not the end of the world until it is. We can't just give up.
We need to stay informed, engaged, and hopeful.
Right.
And that means looking at the data objectively.
Yeah.
So what does the data tell us about our progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
What's the verdict? Are we bending the curve?
The short answer is it's complicated.
Okay.
While there's been a lot of progress in raising awareness, driving innovation, and investing in climate solutions, the reality is that global greenhouse gas emissions are still rising.
That's disheartening to hear.
It is.
But I guess it's not entirely surprising given how long we've been reliant on fossil fuels and the sheer scale of the systems we need to change.
You're right. We're dealing with a system that has a lot of inertia.
Yeah.
Think about it. We've built our entire modern civilization around fossil fuels.
Right.
And shifting away from that isn't going to happen overnight.
So even if we slammed on the brakes today, we'd still feel the effects of past emissions for years to come.
Exactly. The CO2 we've already released into the atmosphere will continue to trap heat for decades.
Wow.
Even centuries.
Okay.
It's like we've set a giant ship in motion, and it takes time to change its course.
Okay, that analogy makes sense.
Yeah.
But it also feels a little overwhelming.
Right.
Like, no matter what we do now, we're already locked into a certain amount of warming.
That's true to a certain extent. But it's not a reason to give up.
Right.
In fact, it's all the more reason to act decisively and urgently.
Okay.
Because every ton of CO2 we prevent from entering the atmosphere matters.
Yeah.
It's about minimizing the damage and creating a more sustainable future.
So it's not just about reversing the trend, but about slowing it down and mitigating the worst impacts.
Exactly. And the good news is we are starting to see some positive signs.
Okay, good.
For example, remember those renewable energy technologies we talked about?
Yeah.
They're becoming increasingly cost competitive with fossil fuels.
Wow.
And their deployment is accelerating around the world.
So those solar panels and wind turbines we're seeing popping up everywhere, are they actually making a difference?
They are.
Awesome.
And as these technologies continue to scale up and become even more affordable, their impact will only grow.
We're also seeing progress in energy efficiency.
Buildings are being designed to use less energy. Appliances are becoming more efficient. And people are becoming more conscious of their energy consumption.
So it's not just about these big technological solutions, but also about the everyday choices we make.
Absolutely. The more people who adopt sustainable lifestyles, the more pressure there is on businesses and governments to follow suit. It's about creating a cultural shift where sustainability becomes the norm, not the exception.
I love that idea, a cultural shift towards sustainability.
Exactly.
But what about the role of governments and policy? Can't they be powerful drivers of change?
Absolutely. Policies like carbon pricing, renewable energy standards, and emissions regulations can create a level playing field that favors cleaner technologies and encourages businesses to reduce their carbon footprint. And we're seeing more and more governments around the world implementing these kinds of policies.
So even though the overall picture might still seem a bit bleak, there are glimmers of hope emerging.
There are.
It's like we're at a turning point.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
The momentum is building, but we need to keep pushing forward.
That's a great way to put it. It's not a time for complacency, but it is a time for cautious optimism. We have the knowledge, the tools, and increasingly the will to create a more sustainable future.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to something you said earlier. It's not just about technology or policy. It's about changing hearts and minds.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, tackling climate change requires a fundamental shift in our values, our behaviors, and our relationship with the planet.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected. That our actions have consequences. And that we have a shared responsibility to care for this planet, for ourselves and for future generations.
Beautifully said. And it's a message we need to keep amplifying.
So to our listener out there, remember, knowledge is power. You took the initiative to learn more about greenhouse gases, and that's a fantastic first step. Now keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep engaging with this issue, because the future of our planet depends on it.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's been a pleasure diving deep into this topic with you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of greenhouse gases. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.